I want to turn to some important issues that are floating around this. And some of this, and I'm very grateful to our first two guests for, I think, already highlighting some of this, which makes my job and my life a little bit easier. But I think there's just several issues that I think are connected about how we understand what took place at the Capitol. And I think it's important to have the right narrative. And it's important to have the right narrative because right now there's a huge obfuscation attempt going on here. You've got, all these corporations and subsets of Republicans and other people who have been 1,000% complicit in all of this, not just during the Trump administration before, and promoting this sort of racist, far-right, fascist-adjacent, fascist witch's brew that has come together here around Donald J. Trump and his soon-to-be gone presidency, that there is a attempt for people to distance themselves, to whitewash themselves, to create new narratives. And as much as I think it feels like what happened, I think it's easy to start to lose it. So there's just a few things that I think are important. The first thing is this issue of false equivalence, and that might, in many ways, be the easiest one for those of us who are for freedom, for justice, to recognize as completely ridiculous, but I think it deserves to be mentioned. Now, many Republicans, Matt Gaetz is one of them, who's a congressman from Florida. I won't go through all the names. It doesn't really matter. The point being, many Republicans are saying, well, yes, it was very bad. It was terrible. It was just whoever could have believed they would do this. But what you have to recognize is that this isn't as bad as all of those, as they would put them, liberals and Antifa, who were burning things down all last summer, destroying the country, and no one said anything about that then, and why are they mad at these people and not mad at them? So I think we just have to start just at the very first point, which is that there is no moral equivalence between the two. Like, that really is the main difference when that argument is trotted out, and what is said is, people who were out last summer in this uprising against racism are people who were by definition, fighting against racism, fighting against white supremacy, trying to end police terrorism against communities, trying to link that to issues of housing, of hunger, of healthcare. Really, people who are out there saying there are people who are being falsely deprived of the things they need to survive and thrive, and there is a system that is in place to enforce that is extremely brutal, that brooks no disagreement in any way, shape, or form, faces zero accountability, and ultimately that those two things work to reinforce each other, this repressive system and the destructive impact it has on communities, and that has to end. And it has to end now. And that, quite frankly, the lack of action on things that many of these people in positions of power claim they actually know are problems is a sign that we need to come out, we need to move forward, we need to protest, we need to be, to get on the map somehow, some way. That is in no way, shape, or form, no matter what took place in the streets, morally equivalent with what we saw January 6th at the Capitol. I mean, first and foremost, what were they there for? I mean, they were there to overturn the results of an election. And not just that, really, but by targeting, really primarily the black community, but black and Latino voters. When you look at what they were targeting, for instance, you take the Wayne County decision where they want to invalidate all the votes in Detroit, but they don't care about these little white suburbs. I mean, you look at what's happening in parts of the Southwest where they're making all these absurd claims about Latino voters and voting because they were not citizens or whatever it may be. So even though the reality of as we've talked about quite a bit here on Breakthrough News, that the reality of what took place in this election in terms of what was decisive for Joe Biden was the suburban surge, the suburban counties surrounding most major cities. They weren't targeting them. Republicans are not targeting suburban white voters. They're trying to overturn the election on the basis of targeting primarily black and brown working class voters. So there's that right there, which is obviously morally repugnant. But I mean, look at who these people are. There was a guy there in a Camp Auschwitz hoodie. Camp Auschwitz. And do you know how they found the guy? They've now arrested this guy because his neighbor in Newport News, Virginia was like, oh, I see this guy all the time because he wears it to the grocery store. So, it wasn't anyone in that mob that turned him in. They're all standing around him, taking photos, all these different things. It gives you a sense of who the people were who were really there, what their agenda was. And obviously not everyone is the guy with the Camp Auschwitz hoodie. But nevertheless, they're here promoting this Trump agenda, which is extraordinarily destructive to people in all ways, shapes, and forms. So, I mean, you know, they're not that far away from the guy in the hoodie, quite frankly, when you look at the practicality of it. So morally, there's no equivalent at all. But secondly, and I think also importantly, and it deserves to be said, and we want to show you some videos that speak to this, is the issue of, and I think this is the equivalence issue that a lot of people are noting from progressive people. How is it possible that they just did nothing to these people when they were brutally repressing demonstrations that I have to say were not composed of people who were showing up with trucks filled with napalm, planting bombs in different areas, carrying assault weapons with open Facebook posts about how they're going to assassinate people? No, not that. People who were just peacefully protesting in front of federal buildings in some cases, who were brutally repressed. So, I mean, just to give a quick sense and a quick, you know, side by side, we want to show a few things that really lay that out. The first one I want to show, because it's specifically about these federal forces, is from Portland, where they sent these BORTAC units from ICE, or Border Patrol, excuse me, Border Patrol Special Forces, you know, out to attack demonstrators. Let me not say too much more. Look at the video. Do I need to say any more? When you really look at that and compared to what the police were doing on January 6th. But let's just do a little bit more here. Here's some scenes from the District of Columbia the day that Donald Trump was clearing a peaceful protest in order to have a photo op.
Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter!
You know, just for good measure here, I want to show you one more from DC of DC police, and this is just before when they're pushing people, cornering people, they forced them into a house and laid siege to the house all night. This is just before then. Yeah, and you heard the police there chanting, move back, move back. That's something that's appeared all over. But I mean, you just, you know, there it is right there, as clear as day. And you compare that to what they were doing on January 6th, just for those who maybe somehow missed it. Like, for instance, this video that has gone relatively viral of the police just letting people in.
Police are squabbling with protesters. Oh, there we go. And they just breached the Capitol again.
There you go. And here's another one that we actually just found today, searching. Yes, this is what we do for you here in Breakthrough News. Searching through videos that were on Parler. And this one is of the police. I don't really know what they're doing. We'll just show the video.
We have the building. Yeah, we do. No. They're withdrawing. There's nobody else inside.
What do you mean there's nobody else inside?
We just extract them. This is the cops. The building's yours.
I mean, are you kidding me? I mean, you can see the two things. In the uprising, you have military formations, and they're just beating the hell out of anyone, no matter what. The Capitol, they're just randomly letting people in and randomly leaving, which really brings me to my next point. It's obvious that this was not just some accident, and I think many of you probably feel that way. And I think one question we have to ask ourselves, knowing that, is how much do we know already about how high this went? And I'll preface this by saying we don't know everything, but we know a lot, and we know a number of things that are very important. And the first thing I want to do is bring up a screenshot here just for you to see that was from a Wall Street Journal article. This came out just before. I mean, I'm just going to read a little bit of this to you. Federal authorities had planned to deal with protests this week with a relatively small, minimally visible presence. So that means from Jump Street, they had planned not to really do anything as it concerns what was coming up, which is extraordinarily notable given the types of things they do for nothing else. I mean, we mentioned large peaceful protest in DC. We have a photo here. I think we have a photo here that I want to bring up from the Lincoln. This is the Lincoln Memorial before a completely peaceful, and look, I know that there's things that can be said about, nonviolence and violence and how we look at different protests. But the key factor is if we could bring the photo up one more time, this is the Lincoln Memorial, so nothing goes on there. This is just a giant piece of granite behind these people. There's no threats at all, and this is how they set it up. So obviously someone had to make this decision, and clearly something had to happen. So here are some of the things that I think are notable. I'm going to read some of these to you, so sorry for checking my notes, but I want to get this right because I want you to know what really happened here. So we know that the head of the Capitol Police, who is now resigned, who himself, by the way, is under fire for not doing anything, but he's actually not the top. It's the sergeant of arms of the House and the Senate who are like the top security officials. So this guy says that the former head of the Capitol Police, that he was telling them because it was 100% obvious. That's another thing that we should have said. People were openly saying on Facebook they're going to be bringing weapons and doing violence. He said that he asked for the National Guard and that the Sergeant of Arms like, nah, we don't really need that. We also know that Mayor Muriel Bowser of Washington, D.C. told a range of federal officials, including the FBI, according to them, that she only wanted to have a light police presence, a light footprint. She didn't want, any major issue. And again, this is while they know that people are openly potentially planning violence, that they were there 3 months before, and a month before rather, and they stabbed 3 people. And we also know that the Army also was very resistant to deploying the National Guard. And in fact, even at the time that the Capitol had been overrun, they didn't initially want to move forward on that level. So just right there, if we just take a second, you have to ask, why would they do this? They must have given some reason. They all claimed it was optics from different perspectives, and this is what they're claiming. I have my doubts, but that they didn't want it to be seen as if there was a massive police presence in downtown Washington, D.C. Now, that's what they say. And if we even just take that as a grain of salt, and I'm going to say something else about that in just a little bit, I think one thing we have to recognize is that means at the very least, they didn't take these people seriously at all, despite the fact that they were openly putting violence out here. But I think there's questions about whether or not that is what really happened. And I think one of the questions that has to speak to here is the security arrangements have to be run by congressional leadership, which certainly makes you wonder whether or not there were sort of right-wing leaders in Congress who were looking to tamp this down because the mob was being mobilized partly by them. So a couple things I want to note about that issue. Now, Representative Mickey Sherrill, I believe it's Mickey, actually spoke about this, saying that she had seen members of Congress doing things that looked like sort of a reconnaissance mission. Let's show that video.
And so I arrived in the Capitol the week of the 6th, and I was very secure. I was very concerned about the violent crowds, the violent extremist groups that were coming to the Capitol for the mobs on the 6th, called there by the president. And I told my staff not to come in that day, to work remotely, not to be anywhere near the Hill. And I was really shocked when I got into the House office building and saw these groups inside. And what was so shocking is as you mentioned, visitors aren't allowed in the Capitol complex. Since March, since the start of COVID, that has been shut down. All tours are shut down. That was true in the last Congress and was reiterated on January 3rd in the new Congress, that there would be no tours allowed, even tours given by members. And so the only reason you'd have a visitor is on official business. So to see these groups around the Capitol complex was really striking. And given what we know the next day of what happened, it's really shocking that those ties were made. And it was so odd to see them that my chief of staff called the sergeant at arms to say, what is going on? And he reiterated the only way these people could have gotten into the Capitol complex was with a member or that member's staff. And we now know that those violent groups that attacked the Capitol complex had inside knowledge of the Capitol grounds.
Inside knowledge. It's certainly an interesting point there, and I think that's that's going to be looked into. There is an investigation that's already taking place into this, whatever these reconnaissance missions were. But I think it just raises the final point that I want to raise here. These people had inside knowledge. They obviously seem to have some level of support inside of the security establishment wanting to tamp things down. And it speaks to the issue that this was not just some random event of fringe people. I mean, this was a major right-wing mobilization that went to the top, to the highest level, really. The people who are the 1% in charge of the Republican Party. Here's a good example. The Republican Attorneys General Association, that's all the attorney generals who are Republicans in the country. Can't get more establishment than that. Through their dark money arm, and they get all sorts of money from every big corporation, through their dark money arm, they were a sponsor of this to the degree that they actually sent out robocalls encouraging people to show up. So we want to let you hear some of that.
I'm calling from the Rule of Law Defense Fund with an important message. The March to Save America is tomorrow in Washington, D.C. at the Ellipse in President's Park between E Street and Constitution Avenue on the south side of the White House, with doors opening at 7 o'clock a.m. At 1 o'clock p.m., we will march to the Capitol building and call on Congress to stop the steal. We are hoping patriots like you will join us to continue the fight to protect the integrity of our elections. For more information, visit March to Save America.
So again, that comes from the Republican Attorneys General Association. Well, their dark money arm, that's the organization the woman was with. But it gives you a sense of how high this thing really went. I mean, they're doing robocalls. That's big mobilization. Turning Point USA, that's Ben Shapiro of WAP fame, some might say, who now is denouncing the whole thing. Oh, this is so terrible. Well, he also sponsored 80 buses. I don't know if we have a photo we could bring up of this. He did this tweet. Charlie Kirk, who did I say? I was waiting for the studio to tell me that I got it wrong. Who did I say? Ben Shapiro? Anyway, Charlie Kirk, they're all the same to me. They're all terrible. But you can see this right here. 80 buses full of patriots to D.C. to fight for this president. They actually had a nice little graphic that they put out there. They were offering people deals with hotels and the whole 9 yards or whatever. So even though they've now denounced the thing and are saying they're not for it, and of course they're, among other people who are on their board, Foster Freeze, the furniture 100 millionaire that's out there, obviously major organizations are supporting this. ABC News reporting that White House aides were directly working on this issue. You've also got some of these organizations that were sponsoring them. One of them, Phyllis Schlafly's Eagles, I looked into this a little bit. They don't say that much about how they were funded. A lot of this is dark money. But I do know the guy who was the president had a group before that was solely funded by a $2 million donation from a guy who got rich off of fracking. So again, these are not just random people. Jenny Thomas, that's the wife of Clarence Thomas. She was a big supporter of this, all over Facebook, all over social media, telling people to show how great of an event it was while it was going on, saying it was great. So nevertheless, this is very high level people. So I really just want to take a step back here and sort of summarize it, because I think people are saying, well, why did this happen? And how could this happen? As if it was random, as if it was fringe, as if it was unpredictable. But the reality of what we know now tells us enough that, one, it was completely predictable. These people were openly organizing to do a number of things, including commit violence. Two, this was a major right-wing mobilization that came straight from the heart of the right-wing money machine to promote this completely fraudulent effort to overturn the election by targeting black and brown working class voters primarily, and that they planned this event specifically to create some level of disruption to push forward their cause. And this is the most speculative part, but as we were talking about these high-level connections and the connection to the security forces, it seems relatively clear that there were also allied forces in Congress and in the administration working with the various local officials and federal officials on security to tamp down the security presence. And the only reason you would want to do that, it's not optics, it's because you want to make sure that you can create the maximum level of disruption, which is obviously what these people promoting this wanted, to try to find a way to stop the count. So it's not, fringe, it's not random, but this is really a major right-wing mobilization, and we have to put the blame where it really is, not just on random people who showed up, but the people who paid for it and the people whose political agenda is behind it.